about burying the dead in Scripture, history, and today. As you know, we've been talking about paths of mercy for several months now. We're going to go through the corporal works of mercy. And today we're going to talk about burying the dead. We've talked about a variety of different things. I actually want to finish off a thread that I started a couple of months ago talking about visiting the sick. And what I want to talk about is what happens to us all. We all die. We're conceived, we live for a time, maybe only in utero, and we die. So that's sort of not very poetic. But as Dan is going to enlighten us on, and hopefully I can share with you a little bit, it is extremely powerful. There is an extreme amount of poetry here and a lot of beauty. And we're going to dive into that a little bit. But I want to reintroduce to you Miss Helen, who I had introduced several months ago to you, as an individual who had gotten sick, had a hip fracture. We fixed it. She was healing. We found out they weren't feeding her at the care center, not through conscious neglect. It was just they didn't understand what needed to be done to take care of people with Alzheimer's and feeding and that. Well, my kids and my wife started going out to the Maplewood Care Center on a several times a week, probably 3 times a week, and then we go out there Sunday after Mass to visit. And we just go and hang out and make sure that she had pudding pops and things that she would eat. And she was all bright and cheery and, absolutely 100% demented. I mean, just happy as a clam. And this went on for quite some time, and I really don't remember how long, because as a surgeon, my interest in it started to wane as soon as she had actually healed. I mean, she's healed, the family had fully engaged, which maybe wasn't the case, actually. And it's one of those things when you're engaged in a work of mercy like that, when you see something truly miraculous happen, you see real healing come to families and things. It's a beautiful thing to watch when it happens. And in this case, the family had fully engaged. And once they were fully engaged, we were kind of superfluous. I mean, we didn't need to be there. And I think Kim and the kids went out and visited a couple more times. And it was several months down the road, she eventually died. She's a very, very, very sweet, wonderful, very, very old lady. And eventually she died. So we heard about the funeral, and it was actually up at St. John the Baptist in New Brighton. And I talked to Kim and the kids, and I said, we should go. We should go. I try to go to funerals of patients of mine, particularly when I didn't cause them to have a funeral. So I do try to go. And so this, fortunately, was a Catholic funeral, so it made it easy for me to want to go. And it's beautiful. So we show up. I'd never been to St. John the Baptist before. I walked in there. I said, it's a beautiful church, and we're just kind of sneaking in the back because we're not really friends of the family, and it was kind of weird. So I thought we'd just sneak in the back because that's what we do. As soon as we walked in, it was like everyone was quiet in the it was like that area where we had the viewing right before you actually go into church. Everybody was quiet. I mean, there were a couple hundred people there, and it just got quiet. And all of a sudden, one of the sons came up, and actually, her son and daughter came up, and they grabbed my kids, and they hugged them so tight, and they just started crying. And everybody, 200 people, came up and just crowded us, and just were like hugging us and kissing us, and I mean, we're from hugging people down in southern Indiana and Kentucky and stuff, but this made me uncomfortable. But anyway, go to the funeral Mass itself, we thought, we'll sit in these back pews, and no. They put Kim, the kids, me, everybody, we're right there in front with, the sons and daughters of this wonderful, beautiful lady. It was a beautiful Mass, a beautiful funeral. And you can see how this whole family that had been fragmented came together in this, first off, at the end of her life, but in sending her forward and in praying for her and holding her up in prayer. They all came together. And we thought, okay, this was beautiful, beautiful Mass, and Dan is going to enlighten us more about these practices here in just a minute. But we started heading to our car, because of course you go to the graveside and burial, right? And we're like, we're not really, So we start going to the car. They stopped the motorcade. They stopped the motorcade. And everyone got out. And they came over, and you could see the funeral director fuming. They were like, this was not the script. And they all came over. And you know, we basically said goodbye. It was the last I've seen any of them for, it's been probably 6 years, 7 years. I haven't used a lot of their names or, you know, publicized a lot of the stuff because, you know, it's a good story. I mean, it's a good story. I like sharing it. But I don't want to get into their business, their family and their time and their privacy in that. But it was beautiful. And the son and daughter who maybe weren't as active in their faith, but that one claim that he made, I'm a loyal son of the church and I want to do what the church teaches. That statement of faith led him into something that I don't think he expected or the rest of the family expected. And it was beautiful. So thank you for your kind attention. I just wanted to share the end of that story with you. I want to turn it over to Dan, who, are you ready? Okay. I want to turn it over to Dan, and he will educate us.
So burying the dead in Scripture, history, and today, these are just a few random thoughts that I've been rattling around my head, and I put them down on paper, trying to make them flow a little bit here. And I was just thinking about the date on there, August 12th. This is 2 years to the day that my dad passed away. Really? So that was kind of an interesting timing. Actually, yeah, I think there's a mass for him tomorrow here at the family. So, and then I also looked up the memorial for today is St. John Francis de Chantal. She is the founder of the Visitation Sisters and was with Francis de Sales that she worked with that. And I kind of want to give her kudos because when I was reading a little bit about her, I found this quote and I have to share it with you. She was married at age 21, had 6 kids, but by the time she was 28, she was a widow and had already lost 2 of the children, so she only had 4 kids. So if you think about burying the dead, by the time she's 28, she's gone through this process 3 times. But while her husband was alive, and this is the fun part about her attitude, I think, her husband was a courtier, part of the royalty, and so he was gone away at court a lot of times, or with the army. And when he was gone, she dressed very soberly, very plainly. And she was reproached for that manner of dressing, and her reply was this: "The eyes which I must please are 100 miles from here." I'm like, wow, what a good attitude. So, the eyes which I must please are 100 miles from here. So let us remember St. John Francis de Chantal today. So when I was thinking about doing this, I just kind of wanted to refresh myself about the Year of Mercy. And then as I was doing the talk, I got to thinking, or I ran across the phrase actually, the Year of Mercy is kind of a shorthand name for it. It's actually a jubilee, an extraordinary jubilee of mercy. So it's not just a year of mercy, I mean, as good as that is, it's an extraordinary jubilee year of mercy. And so I'm wondering if anybody's actually read the papal bull announcing it. So if you're interested, I did print it off. I haven't read it myself. It's about 20 pages. Might make a good study for some Catholic men. But that's where I got the insight that it's an extraordinary jubilee year of mercy. So we're on number 7 there, corporal works of mercy to bury the dead. But it's an actual part about burying the dead is pretty cut and dried, right? You know, when the person dies. In our culture, we do an embalming process and then have the funeral, and then they're dead, they're buried. But it's hard to talk about the topic without kind of like what Doc was describing as far as the process right before that. And so it's very easy to get into the spiritual works of mercy because there's various aspects about the burial process and leading up to it that involve instructing the ignorant, counseling doubtful, to bear wrongs patiently even, that might come up. To comfort the afflicted is something else I'll touch on. And finally, to pray for the living and dead. So those things really are spearheaded or get launched by this particular horrible work of mercy. So, and when we talk about mercy, I also wanted to say, okay, what is mercy? I mean, I might have my thoughts about what it was. This I pulled out of the newadvent.org site, which I pulled a fair number of resources from them. Because I really liked how it said to have a compassion for, and that's the emphasis is mine, the compassion for and if possible to alleviate another's misfortune. And that certainly is applicable when the person's alive, but in a sense when they're dead, it's, in one sense the thinking is, well, they're dead. They're dead, how can you alleviate their misfortune? But with, the body is just the temporal part of our being. We still have the eternal soul that continues on. So I wanted to kind of give that backdrop for this. When I was thinking about burying the dead, too, the first topic, to me there seems to be two sides to it. One is just the actual practical nature of disposing of, in a sense, I don't like that word, but I haven't come up with a better one, of the body. And it's interesting if you look at cultures, not that I've studied them, but just in my experience, all cultures have some sort of ritual or rite and practice for how they dispose of their bodies. Now, it's not always burying them. Some Native Americans, they wrap them up and put them on a platform. Other cultures will stick the remains in a jar. Others burn the bodies. But pretty much, I haven't heard of a culture that doesn't do something out of respect and honor for the dead person. And part of that may be just, well, when I die, that's how I'd like to be treated. Is not just thrown in a garbage heap or whatever, but I'd like to be treated with respect and honor. So that was kind of the natural aspect. But I think a lot of what I was thinking about for this talk was more on the supernatural level. And so when I started thinking about that, the words respect and honor came to mind. And when we think of respect and honor, to me, the highest example of that is how the military treats their dead, which is why I put that particular photo on there. But I do have something in addition to that. And just because of my work with the Squires program, and it seems like the young men have a little harder time, especially grabbing what, or understanding or defining what the word honor means. I wanted to put the two definitions I found up there. And they kind of goes along with the supernatural aspect of burying the dead that I wanted to touch on. It's basically the treating the person in an appropriate way from the respect aspect and honoring them because of their worth or their station, who they are. So when I saw that, it's like, yes, those are the right two words that I want to touch upon. As I was looking for the picture to put on here that I've already shared, I ran across this picture, which I thought was rather interesting. Has anybody seen this before? You know who this is at all? Either the Indian or who's in the casket? I thought this was kind of interesting because in American history, we always haven't treated the Native American Indians with the respect that is due either them as living or dead. But this happens to be Glenn Crooks, who was a Native American from Shakopee. He's part of the Mid-Atlantic Sioux band down there at Carter Lake. He's saluting the former President Ronald Reagan at the Capitol Rotunda. This was back in 2004. And it was just a picture that struck me about one culture dressing in an appropriate manner to honor another leader of another culture, especially, again, given the backdrop of relations. It always hasn't been the best there. So as good Catholics, I want to know what your FBV is. You know what that is? Hey, very good, very good. So anybody have one they want to share? Okay. Well, you can guess mine. So any thoughts from that picture and knowing that it's an Old Testament reading, what one of my favorite Bible verses is? And this is way before I even thought about doing this talk. Goes back a long way. A little bit more. Another hint.
God breathed life into the man?
Sort of. I was going to put a different picture up here, but I didn't want to give it away too much. Genesis, that help anybody? The word image?
Created image.
Yes, created in the image and likeness of God. And I'll explain in a minute why I'm kind of quizzing on this. So God said, let us make human beings in our image after our likeness. And to me, that's such an important start to our existence. And one of the books I was reading about the Year of Mercy, I think it was the Matthew Kelly book, made the point that, have you ever thought that there was a time that you didn't exist? And it's kind of hard to think about that, but it's all of a sudden you didn't exist and bang, there you are. And it's so important in that you existed and that we all existed, we all have original sin, that God created a plan for our redemption. And He didn't do that for the dogs or the fish or the bees or any other creature. He did that for us human beings. So I'd suggest that as adopted sons and daughters of God, that this particular image and likeness statement is foundational to understanding a lot of Catholic ethics and morality. At least that's my opinion. You could argue about that. But if you understand how important we are and how precious we are in the sight of God, to me that makes a lot of sense. It makes so much more reasonable the Catholic ideas of abortion and contraception and divorce and just on and on. It's just kind of foundational to a lot of that thinking. So from that start, then you start going through the Bible, and it's hard to pick out a particular quote concerning the redemption story, but I did find one. I was kind of pleased with myself because it's also on the USCCB site when I went to look up Bury the Dead. And it is this, from Romans 6:8, if then we have died with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. And the other thing, too, is that this is such an important thought, the resurrection, and how important we are, is that it's in the creed that we recite every Mass, at least on Sundays. So Doc can probably speak to the modern discussion about when does death occur. But from an Old Testament point of view, how long did you have to be dead before you were dead?
Otherwise, you were just mostly dead.
Yeah, you're just there, lying still.
It's like 3 days.
Yeah, it's 3 days. And I heard this on relevant radio from Father Simon, that, you weren't dead until you were dead 3 days. And it's like, really, I didn't know that. I just thought, you're dead. So I think, stop breathing, it's pretty obvious. And so I actually went to the Catechism and looked that up, and yeah, they confirm that, because bodily decay was held to begin on the 4th day after death, and a number of references, so I'll leave it to your homework to look those up. And so when I got to thinking about, I didn't get to think about it. Father Simon says, that makes a big difference in your understanding of the story about Lazarus. Jesus hears Lazarus has died, and he's dead 2 days now. He doesn't run back right away. He waits until, a couple more days have gone back, so that by the time he gets back to where the body's buried, it's been 4 days now. So Lazarus is really dead. As opposed to, if he'd come back after 2 days and raised him to life, then was he dead or not dead? Because of the tradition, too, that this led to, the Jews, other than times of war or disease, where there was kind of an emergency need, they always buried their dead. And that's continued on, obviously, to our understanding of how to treat the body. So, the other point about Christ's own time in the tomb, I didn't research that extensively because I was trying to find the quote and I didn't have enough time, but there's a quote about will not suffer, and I can't remember the exact term, about the body undergoing corruption. So another Old Testament story is concerning Tobit, and I'll just read it quick here for you. In the days of Shalmaneser, I, Tobit, this is Tobit's words here, had performed many charitable deeds for my kindred, members of my people. I would give my bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. If I saw one of my people who had died and been thrown behind the wall of Nineveh, I used to bury him. Sennacherib returned from Judea, having fled during the days of the judgment enacted against him by the king of heaven because of the blasphemies he had uttered. Whomever he killed, I buried, for in his rage he killed many Israelites. But I used to take their bodies away myself and bury them. So when Sennacherib looked for them, he could not find them. And if I remember the story correctly, it was illegal to be doing this. So Tobit is really putting himself out there to follow this particular work of mercy. The other thing, just kind of as an aside, what's important to know about Tobit when you're discussing burying the dead with Protestants? Anybody? Tobit's not a book they recognize, so if you bring this example up, they're going to not consider it valid. So we'll come back to Tobit plays a story in the Catechism in a little bit. So the other aspect I thought about when I was doing this story was respecting other cultures' burial customs. And this particular came to mind because I live in Minnetonka, and Gene and those maybe on the western side are more familiar with this, but they've closed down 101 to repair the highway, right? Well, at some point during the construction, they ran across some Indian burial remains. And so that's extended the construction time. So from a, purely selfish point of view, I'm like, what's the quickest route to do this? But I want to balance that with a story I read when I had an autobiography of Father Pierce, who is considered the founding father of the St. Cloud Diocese. In that book, it covered a large part of the history of early North America. And I think it was Father Jogues actually traveled to Sault Ste. Marie on the east end of Lake Superior. And at that particular spot is where the Indians gathered. I don't know if it was yearly or every a few years for kind of a big celebration. And he was privileged enough to observe their burial rite, ceremony of the dead. I don't know what the exact term is. But he was very respectful in observing that. And I think that's one of the things that enabled the missionaries to proceed further on their travels and advances, as opposed to condemning, the rituals that they were performing. Because to a certain extent, the Indians, they were doing the best they could with what was imprinted on their heart by God. So I think, when we have respect for other cultures' beliefs, even though we might disagree with them, I think that goes a long way to a dialogue and a successful intercourse with them, even if it means that you can't go down 101 as soon as you want to. You got to wait for them to figure out what they're going to do. So cover a little bit about the Catholic style of burying the dead. And this is kind of where I say we get into the spiritual works of mercy. So I went to the Catechism, and amazingly enough, there's not a lot in there about burying the dead. There is these three sections. The dying should be given great attention and care to help them live past their moments in dignity and peace. Helped by the prayers of the relatives. And I think that was key, and this is kind of sometimes where you have to instruct the ignorant, because maybe the relatives haven't been well catechized, and you have to say, well, here's what Catholic practice is. And at the proper time, we do want to call the priest to receive the sacraments. Kind of repeating what I've already said, the bodies must be treated with respect, and they use the word charity here, I thought, which was good. In the faith and hope of the resurrection. It's a corporal work of mercy, and this is here where they reference the story about Tobit. It's actually right in the catechism, what I pulled out. And I thought this was interesting, 23, autopsies can be morally permitted for legal inquest or scientific research. And then the organ's donation is also legitimate. And the last one regards to cremation. The church permits it. I don't know if I want to create a firestorm. It's not encouraged. And I think it might be an interesting topic for another lecture, just to have a whole discussion around cremation, who started it, who promotes it. I did a little bit of reading on there. The Masons are definitely involved in that, where it got started and that sort of thing. So don't want to get into that tonight. So,
Is there documents about it's preferred not to be cremated, things like that, about having?
well, see, that's why I want to come back to that and treat it more in depth.
But there is stuff about that, though.
Well, at one time it was illegal, canonically illegal, but
Just throw out there, I mean, the cremation was started as a movement specifically to deny the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, it is permissible. Now, when you want to get into what's preferred, what's not preferred, I think that's appropriate for a larger discussion and a formal lecture with experts. But I think we need to rest on tonight, it is permissible to be cremated, and people need to know that.
Well, I get that, but they prefer to have, like, whether you can rent a coffin, you can have the body.
Again, I think we probably need to have an expert to discuss that. But it is acceptable, it's completely acceptable for Catholics to be cremated.
And my father was cremated, and so was my mother-in-law, and so I go back and forth on that because, yeah. So I think another time would be a good time to have that one. So, any guesses on who's John?
Any baptized Catholic that's recently turned in an envelope for a financial donation.
And it's the night of Columbus.
They get a rosary.
But that was kind of interesting. You are not legally, you are canonically entitled to and they didn't say funeral mass here, an ecclesiastical funeral, according to the norm of law. So you're entitled to that. You cannot, if you request that, you cannot be denied that. Oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. But the other question, and I would put this under the scope of the church's wider umbrella, who else can receive an ecclesiastical funeral? Any guesses?
What did you say, Dan?
Who else can receive an ecclesiastical funeral? Who is not forbidden to receive one?
Heads of state.
And this is, again, from canon law. Those who are catechumens, so say if, when Henry Haverstock was going through IRCA, he died, he could have gotten a Catholic funeral, even though he wasn't, accepted into the church. Children, and to me this is just practical sense. To me it shows the practical side of the Catholic Church. Children who the parents intended to baptize, but they died. Obviously that probably doesn't happen too much in our culture today, but the 2,000 years of the church, you go back to St. Francis.
I'm going to call you on that one. I think it happens a great deal,
Yeah.
and that we don't appreciate the perinatal loss. My daughter Sarah, actually, between Maggie and Rachel, died as she was being born. Now, the only thing is that since I'm a doctor, I was right there and baptized her as she was being born. But that brings me great comfort because she would have been, she had a funeral mass because she was baptized. However, reading that now, I say, well, that was not necessary for the funeral. So I think that there's a lot of perinatal loss where people might want to consider that.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Good point.
Dan, maybe you said this, I missed it. What's the difference between, what is an ecclesiastical funeral?
I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't have time to look that in. Look that up.
Church. Oh, I wonder if it's a full funeral.
I mean, it's not a mass. Google it. Necessarily.
Again, I'll find out and come back to you on that.
It could be something like with this guy they used the cathedral for his funeral, but it was not a full funeral mass. It was in a Catholic church. It had portions of a funeral that a Catholic funeral had, but it was not the full
full mass.
Catholic, yeah.
I suppose it could be like we have wedding ceremonies where it's not, it's a wedding ceremony in a Catholic church, but it's not a full mass. It could be similar to that, I suppose. And I think the last point is interesting too, because to me it kind of goes along with who can receive communion. Well, there are times, and extremely extraordinary times, where non-Catholics, I think, are permitted to receive communion. I think.
Orthodox.
Orthodox. Okay. But to me, this might be a mission area where there's not another minister of any faith for 100 miles around. There's the Catholic priest perform some ecclesiastical type. Maybe it's not a mass, but they could do some sort of burial rite. So I don't know if you can read this real well, but I did want to show the symbolism is helping the person, and this is the person prior to their having died. And this is where I get into the spiritual work of mercy, of comforting the afflicted, because who is more afflicted or sick than the person that's about to die? Most people, when you talk about being sick, oh, you're going to get well. Well, the person that's about to die is, they're imminently terminal. So we want to try and help that person and their family through that process. Just a couple of thoughts that came to mind from myself and others is helping the person who's dying knowing their wishes. And I think we've heard of cases where, especially if it's an older person, they're Catholic, they want the Catholic, rituals, but maybe the children aren't so agreeable. So maybe there's a point where you need to step in and somehow help facilitate that. Or like a doc story, try to enable a greater appreciation for the Mass. I would like to get, I don't know how many heard Deacon Nigerian's talk.
He's a doctor.
He is a doctor?
Yeah, cardiothoracic surgeon.
Okay. So he gave a Catholic end-of-life decisions. I don't know if that was the exact title talk here about 3 months ago. I'd like to bring it back because he did a great job, I thought, about talking about appropriateness of feeding tubes and just all these end-of-life decisions that we probably should all be aware of. So I think that would be another good lecture talk because I found it very interesting. So helping the person that's dying, helping the caregiver, the person that's there 24 hours a day, giving them a break. And this can be true even after the burial when they're trying to work through the loss. And there's involvement of the church, obviously, the priest visiting, those sort of things. But it would be the greatest kindness to help somebody be prepared for death, I think, in whatever way that's appropriate. And which might be worldly concerns, financial, medical, relationships, whatever. It'd be very interesting to see what the broad scope of things is. And kind of to that point, I asked Matthew Berth, where's Matthew still here? Oh, there he is. He's our Knights field agent. The Knights have a personal planning workbook that covers a lot of these issues. Something as practical as people to notify, teachings, so I'm going to have, and don't take this home. This is just a sample for people to look at, but I would like to offer that as a resource for people thinking about the dying process. So the church's role, praying for the soul before, during, and after the bodily death. Now I did put massive burial, I shouldn't maybe put ecclesiastical funeral, but for most of us it's going to be a Christian massive burial. The graveside rite, which I kind of, in all the funerals I've appeared at, it's like, yeah, you do the Mass, and then you go to the gravesite, and there's a few more prayers. And I didn't appreciate that particular rite until I was talking about this lecture to a deacon, and he said, well, for some people, that's their last opportunity to kind of make peace with the person that's being buried. That hasn't been my case, but obviously as a deacon, he's probably encountered that, where there's some rift in the relationship, and this is kind of the church's attempt to help them resolve that or heal that. So, just get rid of those outstanding issues. The same deacon also reminded me, in a broader sense, the communion of the saints, that the immediate aspect of that is attending any review or the Mass, or if it's a non-Catholic, just attending whatever service is appropriate. We had somebody at work died, and a bunch of us went to the funeral. I think it was a Lutheran service. It was very appropriate, I thought, to be there. But then the continued prayer for each other, and you reminded, it's a two-way street, and it's very hard. This is the best I could do as far as finding a picture about the communion of saints, because a lot of times the pictures they show are the living and those in heaven, but they forget about those in purgatory. And so, we can pray for the people in purgatory. Obviously, the saints can pray for us and those in purgatory also. So, kind of want to remember that just because the person has died doesn't, the body has died, but the soul continues on. And that's why I have this point about visits to the memorial. We call the gravesite, obviously has a tombstone, but really, in another sense, it's a memorial to the person. So with that, I'd like to bring up something that, again, I got it from Father Richard Simon of Relevant Radio. How many of you know where their grandparents are buried? Most everybody? So he actually said he knew where his grandparents were buried, his great-grandparents, and I don't know if he went all the way back to his great-great-grandparents. Now, my challenge to you would be, if you don't know where all those grandparents are buried, maybe you could find out. Now, I'm lucky enough that I know that it's easy for me. They're either buried in Wilno or Ivanhoe. And those are only 3 miles apart. And even for my kids, her father was Lutheran, so they're either at East Elam or West Elam. So for us, it's pretty easy. Now, if you go great-great-grandparents, I'm going to have to do a little bit more work there. So, but I thought that would be a great assignment, actually, to figure out where they're buried so I can share that with my kids. And then maybe if there's, in fact, since my dad passed away, I've had this issue, or not issue, but regret of not asking him more about some of his memories about his parents or his grandparents. I've got a few that I can remember. Luckily, my mom's still alive, so I want to go back to her and ask, okay, what about your grandfather, Nick? Why was he called Pappy? It wasn't called Nick, he was always called Pappy, and his wife, Rose. So I can say, okay, when I go visit the grave, talk to my kids about them, here's a story that can come make them alive. So, and the only other assignment I would give you too is if you're in the Knights of Columbus, to work through the degrees to earn your 4th degree membership. Invite those that aren't Knights to join it, to become that. And with the 4th degree, and I only observe this because I'm only 3rd degree myself, so I'm talking as much to myself as anybody out there. The 4th degree has, I'm not sure what the ritual is called, but when another member passes away, when they have a review with the casket, and it's probably more, again, that's the casket versus cremation part, that's a little trickier there with cremated remains. But they stand guard and take turns standing guard over the coffin.
It's an honor guard.
It's an honor guard, yes. So to me, that would be that's a great sign of honor and respect, and beyond just the normal, we show up and do a rosary for the person, or say some prayers. I mean, it's a bodily honor to give. John, did you have something?
Yeah, when we went for my mom's funeral in November, the Knights of Columbus, they took turns because they had to stand perfectly still when they went up there by the casket during the rosary. And you can only stand perfectly still for a short amount of time. and then they would trade off, and a new guy would go up there. They had never done that before my mom's funeral in that place. It was just really cool. They heard about it, they started doing it for hers. It was really cool.
So my goal is to find out when the next fourth degree is. Usually I think Roland mentioned September, October, there's one. Because I don't know, Brother Laney anytime knows time. And I want to be, help be a fourth degree and stand with his casket.
I was fortunate to be a part of Dr. Steve Johnson's funeral here. He had his fourth degree. He had a fourth degree honor guard, and like John said, we were instructed to be as still as possible while guarding the casket.
So thank you for that, for those stories. And with that, that's kind of the end of my thoughts and presentation. I didn't really get into some of the finer points of the masses and things like that. But
well, Dan, I think that's actually really appropriate, because one of the things when we talk about the mass, we talk praying for the dead, we've really moved into spiritual works of mercy. I think you've done a really nice job, because, as St. Joan of Arc chastised the French nobility, you have forgotten what it is to be human. And the corporal works of mercy are on a human level what we do for other humans. So for you to go to a Lutheran mass, or Lutheran service, but mass, they call it, that's fantastic. I mean, I've gone to a Somali, another patient of mine that I did not directly cause to die. He died, and I went to the Somali funeral. And the thing is that is burying the dead, not necessarily by your belief system, but by their belief system. You're just burying a dead human being and showing them respect. That human being was made in the image and likeness of God, no less than you.
Yeah, that's why I like that phrase so much.
It's a good one.
Yeah.